All right, so Jeffrey, are you almost ready? Okay, great. So welcome, everyone. This is our only and one live event for the 8th Tacoma Moon Festival. And if you somehow join the presentation without knowing or checking out of the Tacoma Moon Festival, please make sure you do that. My name is Lotus Perry. I'm going to be one of your co-hosts along with Ann Larson from event support here. If you do have any technical issues, please, you can chat with her. Just send an email. Send a chat, put in the chat. She's going to try to answer your questions or help you with anyway. And I want to first thank our sponsors. Without our sponsor for the Tacoma Moon Festival, this event won't be here. The Chinese Reconciliation Project Foundation. If you don't know what CRPF stands for, that's what it is. And if you have not heard about us, don't know what we're doing, you can see we have the official logo of the Tacoma Moon Festival behind me here. Check us out, okay? You can find out more about CRPF through the Tacoma Moon Festival website. And in addition to the tea house on the Moon Festival website, there are tons of community organization events, performances, and they are here to stay, okay? Our major sponsors include Tacoma Creates, KBTC, Multicare, Greater Tacoma Community Foundation, Annie Wright Schools here in Tacoma, Tacoma Arts Commission, Tacoma Public Schools, and the Fox Foundation, and many other sponsors. I couldn't list all of them, and also volunteers, as well as our board members on CRPF and the planning committee for the Tacoma Moon Festival. I also want to specifically thank the Asian Studies program at University of Puget Sound, where I actually work, my daytime job, to be a specific sponsor to bring our wonderful Jeffrey McIntosh today with us. And Jeffrey has been a longtime supporter of the Tacoma Moon Festival. And if you've been actually on site, attended some of our in-person festival before, you may have wandered into his elegant tea tent set on the dirt path there while all these other things going on. He's joining us today actually just from Washington State here. And I want to say that we are going to use the chat. You feel free to type in your questions. We are aiming for 1 hour, but we're not limited to end exactly at 7. So we're hoping to have actually a Q&A sessions at the end. But if Jeffrey has time or he's actually able to look at the chat, he may even answer some of the questions. We're going to try to get all of your questions later. All right, so without further ado, I want to go ahead and turn to Jeffrey.
Oh, I can unmute myself. I was just checking on that. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. I'm deeply thankful to all of our sponsors and also Lotus for helping setting this up, University of Puget Sound and the Tacoma Moon Festival. It's always a pleasure to share and meet like-minded individuals, especially in the world of tea. For those of you that aren't familiar, I'll do a brief introduction and a little bit about my background, and then we can jump right into it. So my name is Jeffrey McIntosh. I am a Pu-erh tea specialist and a financial professional. So majority of my history is based in tea and predominantly Chinese teas. I spent a lot of time traveling the world and visiting every major province inside of China, learning about the processing techniques, import, export, and business side of loose leaf tea. I've also opened multiple companies here in the US that had been a strong focus on Chinese loose leaf tea and Pu-erh tea. And I was able to continue my studies of Pu-erh, apprenticing under the tea master at Danong Tea, Elaine Lowe, who's been in the industry for over 2 decades. So I've been very lucky throughout my life. And also my wife is from Vietnam, and I've been very blessed to learn a little bit more about Vietnamese culture. Her name is Bao Yin. and I've had time to go and visit Vietnam. And actually, my wife's family has a tea garden right across the street from their house, and they grew up in the tea business in Vietnam. So I'll share some of the comparisons between Chinese tea culture and the Vietnamese tea culture as well. Also, if you did have the time to visit the virtual tea house at the Tacoma Moon Festival, I would strongly check that out if you haven't. I will do a brief recap of what those videos touch on about what is Pu-erh tea and what makes it so special. Some of you may have heard about Pu-erh tea. Others, maybe it's new to you. Either way, you'll be able to learn a lot about Pu-erh tea. So one thing that's important to understand what is Pu-erh tea is to have a little bit of understanding about Chinese loose leaf teas. There are 6 major categories of loose leaf tea in China, known as white, green, yellow, oolong, black, and a category known as dark tea. Now, dark tea consists of anything that has a fermentation or post-fermentation like component. So that is known as dark tea. Liuan, Liubao, and Pu-erh. Now, Pu-erh is obviously the most popular, and because due to its popularity, has become its own separate subcategory. The thing that makes dark tea so unique and different than the other types of tea we're very familiar with, green, white, oolong, is because there's a very special kill green process. So in order to be classified as Pu-erh, it needs to be grown in or around the province of Yunnan. It needs to come from Camellia sinensis variety Assamica. So if you're familiar with tea, all tea in the world comes from the same tea plant known as Camellia sinensis, but there are multiple subvarietals, and the 2 major ones are Camellia sinensis, variety sinensis, grown all around the world, just depends on the processing and region that'll change the taste. Same tea plant can make a white tea, green tea, oolong, etc. But Pu-erh is coming from variety Assamica. It only grows in Yunnan because there's a very unique biodiverse ecosystem that allows those tea trees to grow. And then we get to the last component. So it needs to be grown in Yunnan or surrounding areas. It needs to be from Camellia sinensis, variety Assamica. And third, there needs to be a special kill green process. So what does that mean? Well, kill green is when there's an application of heat to the tea. All tea has this process. Green tea, you may have seen some beautiful video, people picking green tea, letting it sun dry, and there's a big wok with fire underneath, or sometimes there's electric, and they apply heat to the tea leaf. The reason they do that is they want to stop the oxidation. I don't really want to use the word almost kill the tea, it's kind of extreme, but essentially that's what it's doing, to preserve the color, preserve the aroma, and have that beautiful taste profile. But it also makes those teas have a shelf life. Pu-erh, however, has a special cooking process of a lower temperature because they want to make sure all the enzymes in the tea are kept alive. And this is a key component because if those enzymes are kept alive, it allows that tea to continue aging. It's essentially a living tea. That's why some people say Pu-erh is a drinkable antique and what makes it so unique. So those 3 components is what makes Pu-erh so special. Now, obviously not all Pu-erh tea will age well. It depends a lot on the quality of the raw material. And so that kind of goes to the next step of this lecture, which is talking about what is the difference of smaller trees, older tea trees, how can you distinguish the raw material of Pu-erh, and how does that difference in quality? So one of the unique things about Yunnan is because inside of Yunnan, there's been tea trees that have been growing for hundreds, and yes, some for over 1,000 years. There is a very, very rich history in Yunnan. One of the oldest living tea trees to date is over 3,600 years old in Fengqing, Yunnan, and that is the Camellia sinensis variety Assamica. Now, people do pick tea from that tea tree, but maybe the common person like myself and all of us, it would be very difficult to try tea because it's so expensive now. And it is believed tea trees that are from older tea trees have a more unique fragrance and taste profile. So we'll talk about a little difference. You have smaller bush teas, which over 97% of Pu-erh tea is coming from smaller bushes. So my definition of smaller bushes is usually under 80 years old. So these can be plantations, these can be farms, they can be propagations, they can be plantings. And the majority of Pu-erh tea is coming from these smaller bushes. It's not necessarily good or bad. Typically before 1996, almost all Pu-erh tea was always picked from smaller bushes. It wasn't until 1996 there started to be a separation of tea being produced from older tea trees and tea being produced from smaller trees. Before, they would just pick and they kind of mix everything together and produce Pu-erh. But there wasn't a number of other problems as well, such as overpicking, etc. But we'll get to that at a later date. So in 1996, the tea cake that made old tea trees so famous and unique is called Truly Simple Elegant. It was a production from Yiwu, where some merchants went and they wanted to make a Pu-erh tea cake exclusively from ancient arbor tea trees. And this was quite fascinating because a lot of the locals only used tea from old tea trees as for medicine. It was often not used to make tea cakes. The reason being is because it's very labor intensive to pick tea leaves from very tall and old tea trees. And a lot of those trees were very sacred to the ethnic minority groups that live in Yunnan. So they wanted to produce tea. They said, we'll pay you more money. And they started to notice a very unique taste profile. Before that period, it was pretty common knowledge that Pu-erh tea should only be drunk as it's been aged. Because when it's younger from smaller bushes, it can be a little bit more aggressive. So if you have a Pu-erh tea, you let it age and develop, and you can drink it maybe 5, 10, 15 years later. But now with the introduction of something like old tea trees, they notice you can drink the tea when it's very young and have a very pleasant experience. So younger tea trees, they don't have a root structure. This will make the tea have more caffeination, will make the tea have more tea polyphenols. In fact, almost too many tea polyphenols. So more caffeine, more tea polyphenols. And if there isn't a root structure to small bushes, it means that it cannot pull up a diverse amount of nutrition and minerals. So now we understand that. We'll go to old tea trees. Old tea trees, on the other hand, have been growing naturally for hundreds of years and developed a very, very, very deep root structure. This deep root structure is what makes old tea trees so beautiful. It allows them to bring up an abundant amount of nutrition to the leaves. With that abundance of nutrition and the deeper root structure, those older tea trees have less caffeine and less tea polyphenols. That is, when you drink older tea trees, you'll notice it is more comfortable in the stomach. Smaller bushes, more caffeine, more tea polyphenols, can maybe have a more aggressive tendency in the stomach. Maybe people who are more sensitive, maybe they almost feel something like acid reflux from a very, very strong Pu-erh. So between smaller bushes, older trees, you're looking for something that's more calm, more grounding. So older tea trees have this beautiful component to them. So this is how you can kind of differentiate from smaller and older tea trees. And also, in contrast to smaller bushes, less than 3% of all Pu-erh tea in the market today is indeed made from older tea trees. So Pu-erh tea is fascinating in this regard because it's not like white or green or black teas that can be grown anywhere in the world with abundance, as long as you have a good region and good tea master that oversee the process to create a beautiful cup of tea. But Pu-erh is a very, very scarce resource, which also drives up the price. So now we know a little bit about younger trees, older tea trees, but now we all need to know about the separation between what is raw Pu-erh and what is ripe Pu-erh. So we know Pu-erh tea is a popular category, kind of standing on its own, but inside of Pu-erh, there are two distinct categories. There is raw and ripe. Now, before the 1970s, there was actually only one category, and that was known as raw Pu-erh, but they didn't refer to it in that manner. They just said Pu-erh. And that is because raw Pu-erh was almost the only type. It was picked, sun-dried, special Girl Green, pressed into those cakes. Raw Pu-erh is more delicate, floral, golden-like color and has a sunshine almost color to it. You like to enjoy these teas usually in the summer or in the spring in hotter weather, because raw pu-erh has a more cooling aspect to the body. Now, ripe pu-erh was invented in 1970s, and it was almost invented to resemble that of the characteristics of older raw, because as raw ages, it changes, it becomes deeper, it becomes darker. So ripe pu-erh was then invented to resemble that of old raw, but a much more affordable. So they pick it, they sun dry it, and they do a wet piling process. This can last anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. This is breaking down the tea leaf's structure and essentially accelerating that post-fermentation process to have it resemble that of something like old raw. So the color of ripe pu-erh is very dark, rich, red, amber. It has an earthy characteristic, and ripe pu-erh is best consumed in the winter or autumn because it has a very warming component to it. So that's kind of the difference between raw and ripe. But I do have to add a very important note here. It is true, many times ripe tried to resemble that of older raw, but now the techniques of wet piling and processing have advanced to such a degree, it really is its own category, and masters of fermentation can get very unique characteristics out of a ripe pu-erh that you may not be able to get from a raw. So those are really standalone categories. It's not just trying to resemble that of older raw tea. So now we know a little bit about pu-erh tea and kind of the background. I want to talk a little bit about the health benefits. We're all in a very interesting time in our lives. Even with the certain type of sicknesses going around, we want to be very happy and healthy with our body. Now, tea is just a certain component that should also be added on top of a good lifestyle, food, etc. But tea has been known to be like a medicine for many, many generations. And that is because it has so much nutrition, but it has a lot to do with the raw material. I even released a video a little while ago about not all tea is healthy. So we should think about this sentence, not all tea is healthy. In America, I've seen, it's very different than in Eastern countries. People will say, oh, tea is healthy. I'll take the healthy alternative. Oh, let's do a green tea. Green tea is good for X, Y, Z. Pu-erh tea is good for X, Y, and Z. And for myself, when I hear statements like that, it's the same as saying, oh, food is healthy, but not all food is healthy. We know fast food and heavy oils, etc. That type of food is not as beneficial to our body. So shouldn't that also be applied to tea? There's different raw materials that are produced and grown all around the world. And since I predominantly reside in Chinese loose leaf teas, I want to talk about that particularly. This is a product that is grown in China, an agricultural product that does not have as many standards or regulations of that of something like food in our grocery store. So we should be even a little bit more careful with the tea we choose to consume, especially if we're choosing to consume it on a daily basis. So the raw material that comes from is very important. And one way you can assess the quality of the tea, it does take some time, just like food. Sometimes we'll eat food and we'll say, wow, that was a great dinner, and you feel pretty calm and comfortable. Other times we'll eat food and say, oh my goodness, I don't feel so good afterwards. So tea, we should apply that same logic. And tea is about the taste and aroma, but sometimes when you drink tea, you can almost feel relaxed and really focus on the feeling the tea gives you. The importance of how it feels in your stomach is just as important as the beautiful taste profile it leaves in your mouth. So we're looking for a calm experience. The reason I'm focusing so much on experience and feeling, because I really do believe it's the best way to adjust the quality of the tea we're drinking, having that feeling in our stomach 30, 45 minutes after. I always recommend, if you're going to drink tea, to always wait 30 or 45 minutes after you eat food, and then wait 30 or 45 minutes before you eat another food. You want to have time for your body to rest and digest before you drink tea. If you drink tea too fast after you eat, it can affect the digestion, and it's difficult to assess the quality of the tea. So all teas will be beneficial for digestion: white teas, green teas, oolong teas, black teas, etc. Because it's a hot beverage, and it also has some nutrition. But some teas have a lot more caffeine. If we go to pu-erh, I mentioned with that deep root structure, an abundant amount of nutrition, you're actually going to be getting a lot more benefits when drinking this tea. And that is why a lot of pu-erh tea, you'll notice if you go to a Chinese dim sum restaurant, sometimes there'll be a bowl, maybe not an American dim sum, but if you go to Hong Kong or China, there'll be a bowl in the middle of the table of a very dark liquid that's hot. You say, what is this bowl? That's actually ripe pu-erh. And it's to help put your hands in the right pool to kind of pull off the oils in between your little dim sum dishes. And ripe pu-erh has a very similar effect on the stomach after you eat food. That's why people eat very greasy, heavy food. They always kind of reach for that ripe pu-erh because it helps the digestion and helps release some of those oils and fats that got caught up in the system. And it also has been known that pu-erh tea can be very beneficial to cholesterol and helping cleanse the body and relax and high blood pressure. Now, obviously, a lot of that has to do with the raw material. I'm not a doctor myself, so you want to make sure and test those things. But overall health, it can be very beneficial. And one way I've learned to test that is I look for tea and I drink it, and I get more in tune with my body. So I developed something known as the 3-day rule. So if you feel like, well, it's very difficult for me to judge the quality, I'm buying tea from a lot of people, I don't know the quality, it's all okay. You don't have to be an expert to understand the quality of the tea you're drinking. And I developed this rule known as the 3-day rule, because before I drink some expensive teas and then I drink some cheaper teas, and I wouldn't understand why a tea is maybe $1,000 and a tea is $10. A lot has to do with the raw material. The better the raw material, the more health benefits to the body. So the 3-day rule is to take a new tea that you're just experimenting with and to isolate that experience. So let's say I have a new ripe pu-erh I just found. I have a nice 100-gram cake. I'm really excited about it. And as tea lovers, we get very excited. And sometimes we want to drink a lot of different tea, a ripe tea, a raw tea, a black tea, a green tea, all in the same day. But if you do that, it'll be very difficult to understand this new tea. You want to understand what is the effect on your body. Because if I drink a ripe pu-erh that's very calming, and then I drink a green tea and a black tea that's higher caffeine, and I can't sleep that night, I won't know which tea affected my body in what way. So by taking the new tea and only drinking that tea for 3 days, I'm not drinking any other tea, normal tea routine, you want to drink tea in the morning, afternoon, it's okay. But then it gives your body time to filter out whatever you've been eating or drinking and only drink that tea. And the effects that tea gives you, whether it be calm or a headache, you'll be able to easily identify that this tea is giving my body what reaction. So by applying this 3-day rule, isolating the tea experience, you can very understand the quality of the tea without being an expert. We're just making our bodies more sensitive, more aware of what we're drinking. Now, obviously, once you have a collection of teas you really like, you don't always have to apply the 3-day rule every time you want to enjoy tea, because once you have a collection, you want to share with friends, you want to drink different teas in the day. So when you're trying to evaluate a new tea, this 3-day rule has been very, very effective for me to kind of just isolate that experience. That will help distinguish quality and what tea affects each person in a different way. Because just like food, I could offer you a lot of health benefits about teas, but depending on your body type, it'll affect you differently. So for example, I spent 2 years in California. I drank a lot of raw pu-erh almost every day because my body ran hot and the weather was always hot and dry. And I had a little bit of a stressful time last 2 years studying more about pu-erh. My tea master was very disciplined and long days. I was drinking a lot of raw pu-erh. I drink it, I feel very relaxed. But now I'm in Washington. It's a little bit rainier, a little bit colder weather. When I drink raw pu-erh, it's almost a little uncomfortable. So I've switched over to only drinking ripe because ripe is very warming to the body and very nutritious, and it feels more calm. So everyone may go towards a different tea. Find the tea that's most comfortable to you. And of course, we're talking about pu-erh, but this method can be applied to any type of tea you wish to consume. And also, while I'm talking, please think of questions. If anything is a little confusing or you want to learn more, at the end, we'll talk more and help address some of those questions. Because I've spent the last 15 years studying pu-erh. I will do my best to give you a good basic understanding within an hour, but how can we learn everything in just an hour? So as long as you have ideas and thinking, it'll kind of help the process, and maybe it'll help other people as well. So now that I've mentioned this a little bit about health benefits, quality, how to identify it, some people might be very interested in, well, I want to try some of those teas from older tea trees. What is that experience? And this is actually quite difficult, more difficult than you may think. In the beginning, I spent a lot of my money, maybe too much money, on Pu-erh, going to Yunnan, traveling to famous mountains, purchasing tea from farmers, and having my own company. And I was very blessed and lucky to be able to visit a lot of those farms and visit tea masters. And because I didn't apply something like the 3-day rule, instead I would just go to a person's house, drink tea, go to someone else's house, drink tea. And that first initial experience, I would judge the tea, because most tea is judged this way. If you're familiar with green teas or black teas or competitions, all those teas, even coffee competitions, there's a method known as cupping. You cup all the teas, you look for bitterness, astringency, smoothness, sweetness, and then the tea is judged on quality. Unfortunately, with Pu-erh, this is not the most accurate way to judge the quality, because Pu-erh is very much a feeling in the body and experience, just as much as it is a taste. So we do need to go a little deeper when trying to understand Pu-erh. So I tried all these teas, purchased a lot of these teas, and then I had good experiences, bad experiences. I have teas that are bitter and astringent. And then I thought that was common. I thought Pu-erh tea was bitter, astringent, smoky. I thought you needed those characteristics in order to age, develop, right? So you have something kind of radically profound and aggressive, and then give it 10, 15 years, it'll turn into something beautiful, like a rigid rock you throw on the beach, and 10 years later, that rock becomes smooth. Well, with Pu-erh, this is not the case. This is not the case. It acts very different, because Pu-erh is alive. It's not dead, it's alive. So it's growing. And I've learned with my last 15 years that tea growing deep in the forest at a high elevation on the mountain from old tea trees with a deep root structure is not strong. In fact, it is very light. It is beautiful, sweet, and soft. When you drink a good cup of Pu-erh from older tea trees, you feel calm, almost like I want to meditate. Where smaller bush teas can be more aggressive and astringent. So as I was aging these teas last 10 years, buying a lot of tea, oh, it's aggressive, it's crazy. I'll put some tea in Taiwan, I'll store some tea in Seattle. After 10 years, those teas that were very smoky, astringent, and bitter, 10 years later, they are still bitter, astringent, and smoky. And so I had a very expensive tuition fee on understanding Pu-erh, because Pu-erh is alive with a special kilgreen process that allows those enzymes alive. You're actually looking for something that's very light, delicate, and soft, so it can grow and change over time as it ages. You're looking for a Pu-erh to develop with compound interest almost. It starts out very gentle and soft and light and beautiful. But if you're able to appreciate those delicacies and the softness and calmness in the body, you'll notice that those teas will become more fragrant, more tasty, more comfortable as they age. Where a lot of times I also believe that Pu-erh needed to be very strong, and over time it would mellow out, so it would become easier to drink. And so then you can ask yourself the same question. Do you want to buy something that's very aggressive and astringent and mellow out on a trajectory downwards? Or do you want to buy something that's very beautiful and easy to drink, and you can look forward to it developing across the years? So this is the really strong difference I have found with teas growing deep in the forest naturally from older tea trees, this profound component of beauty. Now it is very subtle, but it's also very durable. So I'm going to leave you all with an analogy here, because it's very difficult to go into the technical analysis of ancient arbor tea. It takes a long time to understand how to identify a tea leaf from old trees or small bush or certain taste profiles. So instead, I'm going to leave an analogy that will be very beneficial to all of us. And that is of alcohol. Now, I personally don't drink alcohol, but it's a very good analogy. There is a very, very popular alcohol in China known as Baijiu. Now, this is, if you're not familiar with that, it's an alcohol made from sorghum flour. It's extremely strong, almost 150 proof. And there's a brand called Maotai that's outrageously expensive. And it is commonly believed and understood in China, the majority of Maotai, this alcohol, is fake, more than 90%. and a very small amount is real. So those of you not familiar with this type of alcohol, I'm going to pretend like this type of alcohol was something like Johnny Walker, top shelf, and everyone in America just knew, oh, all Johnny Walker's fake, right? So imagine this kind of philosophy. And there's a saying in China that says, every day, if you drink fake Mao-tai, which has a very strong, aggressive taste to convince you it is real, and one day you are lucky enough to drink real Mao-tai, they say when you drink that real Mao-tai, you'll think it's a very average, simple taste, nothing special. So if it is a very simple, delicate taste, why would someone be willing to spend a lot of money? And that has to do with the raw material. Maybe you feel a little better the next day. You feel a little cleaner in your body. And they have the same saying from a tea master. If every day you drink small bush, aggressive, strong, bitter tea, and one day you drink tea from older tea trees, you may feel it's a little bit light or lacking something. But if you can spend more time with this tea, you'll be able to understand there is great beauty in the subtlety. So that's the taste component. Now I'm going to bring you an aromatic analogy. So with perfume, some of us may be easier to relate to this. Fragrance, perfume, cologne. If we use a very cheap fragrance and we apply it to the skin, maybe we will notice our skin is has some rash, has some irritation, and the fragrance is very loud and obnoxious and very short-lived. But if we're lucky to purchase a very high quality perfume or fragrance, we'll notice when it interacts with our skin, it's very comfortable. It interacts with the heats and the natural oils of our skin, and it will slowly develop as the fragrance interacts with our skin and become a long-lasting, subtle, beautiful fragrance and aroma. Ancient arbor Pu-erh is just like this. It's subtle but deep and beautiful. And understanding that type of thinking will help us dive deeper into the world and help separate smaller and older tea trees. It is very tough. Don't get down on yourself. There's a lot of things. You can get very technical. But the point of drinking tea is to be happy, have a little moment of peace in our stressful day. So that's really why we want to drink tea. But we also want to drink clean, tasty, comfortable tea. So remember, tea is just as much a feeling as it is a taste. So something to think about with all that. Now I want to talk a little bit about Vietnamese culture. If you have any questions in that regard, please let me know. So Vietnamese culture, I've been very lucky to experience tea in a very different way. And before we can really talk about Vietnamese tea culture, I need to talk a little bit more about Chinese tea culture. We've been talking about Pu-erh, this and that. But what is Chinese tea culture and how does it differ? Well, there are all aspects of Chinese tea culture. I'm more familiar with that of Yunnan, so the southwest region of China. It treats tea very differently than every other part of China. Every part has their own famous tea and tea etiquette, etc. In Yunnan, it is very common practice to always be drinking tea. Almost every household has tea or some kind of teaware. Tea is often used to talk business, to talk family, but there is a profound attention to detail. People have specific ways they boil water. They have specific preferences to stone tables or wood tables. Some people prefer teapots. Some people prefer gaiwans. And there is a very, very heavy cultural and historical significance to tea in China. So when people are drinking tea, there is great attention to the quality of the tea. Oh, this tea is from my good friend who is a farmer, who has a high elevation garden and has been doing this the whole generation. Very beautiful tea. Oh, this friend is from my aunt who has their own ancient tea gardens. They only have a few hundred kilos a year that share this very special tea together. There is a strong emphasis on the tea, not always, but there's usually some mention. We're drinking a black tea, green tea, and there's a little story behind that tea. Also, it is far more common to find very sophisticated, beautiful, high-end tea ceremonial houses or tea houses in Yunnan. And you can find it from all walks of life. A very simple tea table from your neighbor down the road or a little shopkeeper to a 4, 5, 6, 7-story building with a restaurant and full tea house with servers and beautiful expensive porcelain and teapots. China also does have a rich history of the quality of their porcelain, a high quality of their teapots and the clay they use. Every detail is almost fitted to be able to reach each tea's full potential by adapting the tool's individual use. And you can go more and more in depth. It's almost in depth and crazy as you want to go. If you want to get into porcelain, you can spend tens of thousands of dollars on the perfect porcelain cup to affect the taste profile of the tea. I've also been in tea houses with good friends drinking Pu-erh. That's probably far too expensive for any of us to be drinking. And there will be a conversation about, oh, I like a flatter, wider cup because it rolls the tea on my palate in a different way. With some people like a smaller cup because teas that are lighter, you want a more dense roll off from the cup into your palate. Anyway, you get the point I'm describing. It can be very technical. So I've grown up in this kind of way of understanding tea, and then going to study under my tea master, it became even more extreme to the point when I was studying tea with her, she wouldn't talk about tea. She'd talk about my posture. She'd talk about why is the corner of that shelf in our tea house dusty. She was talking about my lifestyle. She was talking about there's a whole lifestyle component of tea I need to change, my own behavior, my hobbies, how I treat this tea. If the tea is very expensive and hard to produce, there's a tea master producing the tea. There's a person packaging it. There's a tea master understanding how the tea should be stored, becoming compoundingly more expensive as it ages. So when I brew it, I should also be very aware of these things so I can fully cherish the tea. And it can be a little strict at times. You don't have to do this to enjoy tea, don't worry. It just is a different way to enjoy tea. And so when I went to Vietnam and I first met my wife a little over 4 years ago, this was not the case in Vietnam, but they had a very beautiful tea culture. It was just very different to me. And so when I look at Vietnamese culture, it's very rich in tradition. The aspect of drinking tea is very strong, and everyone knows drinking tea. It is almost responded as a special medicinal plant. People pick the tea leaves, they crush them, they dry them in the shadows, they boil water, they brew tea, and they drink it. And I noticed that's kind of where it ends. Now, obviously, the tea industry has been changing, but I want to talk more about the traditional tea culture. Instead, we'll talk more about the modern culture a little bit later. But the process is very rustic. It's very simple. Now, in Yunnan, I would meet people processing the tea, and they'd be adjusting the wood and fire. And then next week, they say the weather's not good. We need more wood. We need to adjust the temperature. When in Vietnam, it was more about pick the leaves. It was more the whole process or philosophy of enjoying tea rather than the technical details. Now, at first, I say, well, this is a very rustic, simple way to approach tea. But that thought process was wrong when approaching Vietnamese tea. I noticed no matter how simple or rustic the process of Vietnamese tea was found everywhere, from urban to rural, to home to office, from peasants to intellectuals. Everyone was drinking tea in the same way. The art of drinking tea is said to be very sophisticated, but it also is very simple at its core. So people will often go to find a cup of tea in Vietnam because they want to enjoy peacefulness. They want to find that tranquility from the hustle and bustle of life. And as I spent more time drinking this tea and spending more time in Vietnam, and also then listening to my wife about Vietnamese culture, my mind started to really open up, and I started to see the beauty of Vietnamese tea. It was about the people. It was about the happiness. It was about the manners of respect other people, sharing, love, hospitality. This is the core focus of tea. And in Vietnam, there are 3 major categories of tea. There is something known as normal tea, scented tea, and also fresh tea. So normal tea is something we're all familiar with. That tea goes through a normal process. White teas, green teas, black teas, those are normal teas, right? There's a process to them, and they end up being dry, and then we can throw them in water. But then there's also scented tea in Vietnam, and that's something where they're infusing jasmine, lotus, flowers. But there's something unique here. We may think of jasmine tea as having some jasmine oil. We grab our jasmine tea bag. If you go very deep into Vietnamese culture, which I've been very lucky to meet a number of Vietnamese tea masters in northern Vietnam who go travel into the mountains of the old tea trees that are on the border of Yunnan and Vietnam and pick their own tea. And they take those tea leaves while they're drying and put them in a very condensed room. And they take fresh jasmine blossoms and put them in the room for 3 days. And they let the aroma of the jasmine be sucked up by the tea rather than artificially infuse them with an oil. And then they remove the jasmine flowers. So this is a very unique way of doing scented tea. And actually very tasty. I was shocked. It had a very beautiful, subtle taste of jasmine. And the last type of Vietnamese tea, which I believe is the most popular and most traditional, is known as fresh tea. Now, fresh tea is just grab some tea leaves, remove those branches, put them in the hot boiling water, and let them brew there all day. This tea is extremely caffeinated. And the first time I actually drank this tea, my teeth were almost jittering. Because I'm drinking all these right pores, old tea trees I drink this. I'm just shocked. I said, how can anyone drink this? And then I look on the streets, everyone's drinking fresh tea. They're putting it in a big old bottle, a pitcher. They're letting it sit there all day, boiling with the water and drinking it. And this is very, very popular in Vietnam. And many people will say, oh, don't drink this type of tea in the evening. Drink something like coffee. And I'm shocked. I say coffee has a lot of caffeine. They say, no. Fresh tea has more caffeine than coffee. And it's something to get people stimulated. And also it's very cooling and refreshing in the summer and spring because it can get very hot in Vietnam. So by drinking that fresh tea, it has a very strong cooling aspect. So, and they also will put ice in it to kind of cool it down and then drink. But it is a very, very strong tea, but it is the most popular. So if you ever get a chance to visit Hanoi in Vietnam, you definitely will see small huts all along the street serving these fresh cups of tea in the street. So if you get a chance, I strongly recommend it. And also this goes to the next component. So now we know about the different types of tea. So how do people use hospitality in Vietnamese tea culture? So you often will find these teas in all the villages, all the families. They'll be making tea every day and every night to treat the whole village, inviting people from all the houses of the village to come and drink tea. This is not an exaggeration. This happens every day, regardless of how busy the host is in their village. If they see your neighbor or friend come by, oh, please, they stop everything they're doing. Please have a cup of tea. And they'll sit down and they'll casually pour tea and drink. But you'll notice it isn't about, oh, this tea is from my garden, this tea is from this specific mountain. It's just, I'm so happy you're here that we can talk and share each other's story. There's very little attention to the tea, but tea is always used as a way to facilitate good common friendship. Maybe that's due because there's only 1 or 2 varieties of tea because it's growing right outside the village. Everyone knows where the tea is coming from, but it's about the hospitality. And in my wife's village, known as the most famous tea producing village in Vietnam, some of you may know of it, is Thai Nguyen Province. This is in northern Vietnam. And 2 years ago, I went to go visit her on Tet holiday, which is the Vietnamese New Year. And opposite her house is the tea field. And she grew up with tea. And her whole village was drinking tea on a daily basis. But I remember telling her, oh, how do they process the tea? What type of tea is it? And she just kind of looked at me and said, well, it's tea, of course. And so by me, I usually say, well, is it green tea or black tea or oolong tea, etc. And there was just a very, very humble perspective to tea. But there was also a very, very close-knit community. Everyone knows each other. There's over 300 some people in the village. Everyone knows everyone by name. And that's because every day they'll go into each other's house sharing a cup of tea to talk about the millions of different things. They're so friendly. And it's a very strong green tea. So during our wedding, when I got married in Vietnam, we had to go to each of the village's houses and drink a cup of tea after we got married. And they rather do that rather than something like alcohol. Obviously on the wedding day, we did consume some alcohol. You have to do the same thing with all the villages. So be very careful. You're gonna need a lot of tea to protect your stomach. But it was just a very unique way. And that's because the focus is on sharing tea rather than tea itself. There isn't this almost technical analysis of trying to refine the perfect cup of tea. Instead, it's cultivating and maintaining and providing respect for all the friendship of the whole village. It's a beautiful way for Vietnamese culture to host. and also care for each other. Now, in Vietnamese culture, there's also something known as host first, and this will talk a lot about the hospitality of the Vietnamese culture. When you go to someone's house to serve tea, the host will always serve tea to themselves first, and then to the guest second. Now, for us, we say maybe that's a little impolite, but in Vietnamese culture, mentioned about fresh tea, soaking the tea, the stronger the tea, the better the tea. So by saying host first, it's showing the hospitality of Vietnamese culture by saying, I'm always saving you the best cup of tea. I'm taking the lighter, I'm giving you the stronger. And this is very, very in touch with Vietnamese culture. They're very loving and compassionate people. So the approach, everyone is about enjoying the beautiful philosophy of enjoying life. This philosophy then extends to temples in Vietnam. Tea and Buddhism in Vietnam are very closely associated with the form of known as meditation tea. Buddhist monks will often drink tea and recite Buddhist scriptures in the morning or an afternoon, and they're always drinking a cup of tea because of that sorry about my stumbling here, that closely knit community of people that can extend to the temples. You can go to the temples, you can have a wonderful conversation, recite Buddhist sutras, and share a good cup of tea. So people, they say in the temple, tea helps eliminate their desire, free the soul, and enjoy their tranquil life. So it's a very beautiful, a lot of beautiful poems of tea in Vietnam. So Vietnamese tradition is very different than China and Japan. So China and Japan, they care a lot about the ceremonial, the professional, the culture, historical value of tea. There's certain behaviors and mannerisms, sometimes very, very strict in those cultures, where in Vietnam, it's more about achieving the best way to enjoy tea and with friends, just more calm, more humble way. It's neither to say one is better than the other. They both have their beautiful aspect that can be enjoyed on different ways. So that is talking a little bit about the hospitality and the subtlety of Vietnamese people and the way they treat tea. And on this note, I kind of want to open this up to questions. There's so many roads we could go down into different aspects of tea and different culture, but I really want to open it up here. If anyone has questions, this is the time, and then we can address those questions and to do some dialogue now. So let me just look through the chat here.
Jeffrey, do you want me to go over some of the questions with you?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, great. I think it was started with Adrian and want to ask you, give us any general notions of the relations between seasons and Pu-erh teas. I know you mentioned a little bit about that. And what is the general approach to dry season versus wet season, cold versus hot? I think she continued asking that, does it have any relations whatsoever to altitude as to drinking choice? Anyway, just some kind of general guidelines, and also in relation to good storage conditions.
Great. So this could almost be a two-part question. I think you're referring to when do I consume this tea after it has been harvested, rather than those conditions playing a direct effect on the harvest. So first I'll address how you drink tea after it's been produced and you're in a particular environment. So if you're in a more dry, hot environment, I have noticed raw Pu-erh is a little bit better for those conditions. A drier, hotter environment allows the delicate beauty of the aroma of raw Pu-erh to escape, and also helps cool down and nourish the body. So if you're in a hotter environment, you may notice you enjoy drinking raw Pu-erh or green teas more than something like ripe Pu-erh. Also, raw Pu-erh is very, very good for building the immune system. So if I'm traveling, I often will drink raw Pu-erh to help with my immune system. And also raw Pu-erh is very good to consume if you've eaten something that's not so clean. You want to drink raw Pu-erh to help clean that out. Now, wetter and colder environments, you'll notice that you will enjoy drinking ripe Pu-erh more because it's more heating. Also, if you ate too much food and you feel a little uncomfortable or have trouble digesting, drinking ripe Pu-erh will help a lot in that digestive process. If you're in a hotter and humid environment, still raw tea will take the priority. Anything that's hot, usually raw green teas are more enjoyable. Anything that's cold, usually darker fermentation black teas roasted oolongs and ripe Pu-erh are more comfortable to enjoy. In terms of weather, Yunnan is particularly unique because it has very 4-season extremes, which is what makes this tea so unique. Spring harvest is usually desired because there's less rain, and usually has more abundance in the characteristic of the tea. When I say abundance, I mean more nutrition and able to steep the tea more. Autumn harvests tend to be more rainy, and with that rain, sometimes it flushes out some of that abundance and will make a little bit lighter, smoother tea. Droughts usually have a positive effect on the harvest for old tea trees, and droughts have a negative effect on harvest for smaller bushes. Too much rain will also have a negative effect on small bushes and also old tea trees, and not enough rain is usually a positive thing for older tea trees, effects of weather. I hope that answers your question. And then what's the kind of the next question we have on that list?
Okay, so the next question actually is asking, do you have any recommendations for where to purchase? And then along with that, there's a question when do you buy your teas in wheels or in loose leaf? And the same thing is that how can you tell it's ripe or raw? Do it usually get labeled? Okay, so first we'll do raw and ripe. That's the easiest. Raw Pu-erh tends to be a little bit greener. The color is almost a sunshine-like liquid. It'll have some kind of florally component to it. So you can tell by the cake, it'll actually be quite green or brown. Ripe Pu-erh will be very, very dark. The color of the cake itself will be very dark brown, almost black. And it'll have a very deep amber-like color. So that's the very easiest way to tell raw from ripe. When you're purchasing or buying Pu-erh, I actually have a video on this on YouTube as well, so if you ever want to go check back on it. Buying Pu-erh, I'm a little bit hesitant to provide you all with a specific company or recommendation. You all know where I went to go study and work to study more about Pu-erh tea, so maybe that'll give you some hints as well. But when you're buying Pu-erh, I strongly do not recommend ever buying a large portion of Pu-erh the first time you buy. So you should never buy a big cake. I don't care if it's a great sale. I don't care if someone strongly recommends it. Everyone has a very different approach to tea. You want to buy the smallest amount possible. Luckily, a lot of vendors offer sample packs or small samples by 10, 15 grams. Sit with that tea for 3 days. Apply that 3-day rule. And you'll learn a lot yourself. Ask a lot of questions. A lot of these tea companies here in America were very blessed because they're very small, which means they're very responsive. Have a conversation with the owner, ask a few questions, buy a few samples, and be sure to keep an open mind and buy from a lot of different professional tea companies, and then compare the quality of the tea yourself. Experience will be your best friend. Don't buy a lot. Don't try to buy on someone else's hesitation, even though some people say, oh, Jeffrey, very much understand a Pu-erh tea. You don't want to buy a tea based on someone else's recommendation. We always want to be buying tea based on our own critical thinking, our own critical analysis, and understanding of that tea. So why is that? Because when we purchase tea and enjoy it, we want to make sure when we drink this tea, we understand why we enjoy it. Because regardless of what people say or the price going up, etc., if we enjoy that tea now, it's very, very likely we will enjoy that tea as it ages. On the contrary, if we buy tea we don't like in hopes it will turn into something in the future, we probably won't like those teas, because Pu-erh will always keep the same characteristics when the first time you drink it as it ages. So find teas you like and enjoy. Buy small amounts from a lot of different professional companies, and then try them that way. And of course, if you have any additional questions, you can always reach out. We have Facebook groups and social media, etc. I just don't want to put a lot of recommendation on a particular company, because then it's very easy. I've seen people to focus just on one company and lose that open-mindedness. That open-mindedness is so important when we first approach tea and study tea. And then yourself will start to find kind of your own bias towards a particular company or source or mountain, etc. So I apologize, I don't answer that question exactly directly. But again, this is about once you have some of these teas, and what's the good storage conditions? Adrian still want to know. Yeah. So
storage conditions is a great question. If you have less than a few tea cakes, it is not a concern. And the reason I say that is there's a lot of information all over the internet that'll say particular things about creating a Pu-erh, creating a storage condition. In my experience, after storing tea in Taiwan and Seattle and California, Pu-erh is a natural tea, which means you should not, I strongly recommend, never create an artificial environment for the tea to age. You want to keep it in a natural environment. If the tea is good to start with, meaning it fits the classification of good tea to you, it's tasty, comfortable, you enjoy it, it does not need to be put in an artificial environment to change or develop into something you like. It'll naturally progress on its own. This is the beauty of Pu-erh. So if you just have a few cakes, a few rules to follow. Separate raw and ripe Pu-erh. If you just have a little cardboard box, it's fine. Have a little cardboard box of raw, a little cardboard box of ripe. Keep it away from sunlight and direct odors. So as funny as it sounds, something like a linen closet is fine. It's away from direct odors, it's away from the sun. And you want to make sure there's only one concern. You don't want your home to be too humid. If you notice there is dampness in your house, you can always check your Pu-erh wrappers every month. If it's a little damp, then I would recommend a dehumidifier. But being too dry is not a bad thing. Natural environment. And the last thing that's crucial is air flow. There needs to be airflow, meaning open a window in the house every once in a while, allow airflow to go in and out of the storage. Because in California, I even had a friend who bought a lot of Pu-erh, and it's very dry in California, but they never opened the windows in their house. That's fine, everyone lives differently. And what happened was there was dampness because the tea was stored near the kitchen and down the hallway from the bathroom, and dampness built up. And because there is no circulation, that is actually detrimental dampness. That is not healthy humidity. So you want to allow airflow. So keep it away from sunlight, keep it away from strange, strong aromas, so away from the kitchen. Keep it in an isolated environment, raw and ripe separate. In a cardboard box is fine. In a cardboard box is fine. And then keep it, allow some airflow for the tea to age. If it is good tea, every few months, every year, the tea will change itself, which is also a wonderful indication of quality. So that would be my recommendations on storage.
So along with the question about quality, I think we had one question from Maddie about how to brew, but I think we can hold on to that one. But I think Eugene has a question about how do you determine whether the Pu-erh is original or fake? Or we're talking about qualities maybe here.
That's a wonderful question. Thank you for asking. It was, all I can say, it was very different before. Before the 2000s, before 1990s, there was no such thing as real and fake Pu-erh. There was good quality Pu-erh and bad quality Pu-erh. That's it. No one worried about fake Pu-erh. But after the 2000s and the separation of small bushes and ancient arbor and the drastic price difference, they started to introduce something known as maybe mislabeled Pu-erh. So the first thing that was introduced into the market was small bushes were being sold as old tea trees, but no one says old tea trees. But now there is something known as fake Pu-erh. And so what I want to really focus in on here is fake Pu-erh is not always done intentionally. And it does not mean it's the seller's fault or supplier's fault. There's a lot of misinformation along the trail. So when you're trying to identify fake or mislabeled Pu-erh, kind of reflect on what I said before. Over 97% of Pu-erh tea is from smaller bushes. That means less than 3% is from older tea trees. But you never will see a Pu-erh wrapper say, this is from small bush tea, please buy me, because the two most profitable teas inside of Pu-erh are tea from old tea trees and Pu-erh tea that has been aged extensively. So naturally, there's a strong incentive to keep those items in stock. Most businesses will buy from someone and they'll usually go on a hearsay basis. So if someone tells them something, they will tell their customers. And this is where we have to provide our own experience. I have said Pu-erh is a buyer's beware market because of this. And this is why you want to rely on your own experience, your own technical analysis. Use that 3-day rule. Use that analogy. Buy small amounts. Test those teas with your body. And the more questions you ask suppliers, Don't take everything for face value. If something you discover is not so good, don't be very alert or judgmental. Just move on to the next thing. And I will leave, since all of you have been so kind to stay on so long, I'll leave you with some tips to identify quality Pu-erh. We'll start with raw. If I want to identify the quality of a raw Pu-erh, when I brew tea, you will notice on my tea table, I have no strainer. This is a very important point that I really just learned in the last 4 years. There is no strainer. Some teas, white teas, green teas, maybe they do need a strainer. That is fine. But with Pu-erh, especially raw Pu-erh, I never use a strainer when I'm decanting my teapot or gaiwan. There is a particular reason for this. I want to learn about the sediment of the leaf. If I pour that raw Pu-erh into my tea pitcher, the color of the liquid must be translucent. That means it should not be murky. It should not be cloudy. I'm just talking about Pu-erh tea here. There is also sediment. Now I want to identify, well, it's a translucent color, looks beautiful. How do I know if it's from ancient tea trees? Now this is harder, but ancient tea trees from older tea trees have small hairs under the tea leaf. And there'll be small hairs, hundreds, thousands of little hairs in your liquid. Allow the pitcher to set down on the table. Wait, does that sediment always sink? Those little leaf particles, does it sink or does it float? If they're from old tea trees with abundant amounts of nutrition, they will sink. If they don't have abundant amount of nutrition, they'll float, they remain stagnant. If I use a filter, I have removed all obstacles or maybe all of those little fine minute details, and that filter makes every tea beautiful and translucent. So by removing that filter, when identifying or trying to evaluate the quality of Pu-erh, I can learn a lot. Now, of course, later down the road, maybe you don't want little pieces of tea, you understand the quality of that tea, you can use a filter again. But I don't use a filter because of that. I want to make sure that sediment sinks. Next, with raw Pu-erh, a really, really great test. If you have a gaiwan or teapot, preheat that gaiwan or teapot. No tea, just preheat it. Hot water, leave it in there for 1 minute. Pour that hot water out. Immediately pour the dry tea leaves into that gaiwan or teapot. Cover, no water. Hot gaiwan, dry tea leaves. Let for a minute, remove the lid. Appreciate the natural dry aroma. For raw Pu-erh, this aroma should be floral, sweet, beautiful. The aroma should not be dusty, dirty, barnyard, right? You're looking for beautiful, natural aroma. This test, very hard for low quality Pu-erh to pass, very difficult. So that dry aroma test, that liquid should provide you with enough tools to get started. Now there's obviously other things you can dive into, like the technical structure of the leaf, but maybe when you're ready, we can have another webinar, et cetera, down the road. Find me at a later date. Ripe Pu-erh is a little bit more difficult because of the wet piling process. Before, ripe Pu-erh only have good ripe Pu-erh, bad ripe Pu-erh. So easy. Good ripe Pu-erh, bad ripe Pu-erh was strong taste, strong aroma, can be brewed a lot. Good ripe Pu-erh was translucent. So dark color is okay, almost like a black red wine, but translucent. Bad ripe Pu-erh was really murky, cloudy, ink-like separation. But as time went on, people became very intelligent and found a way to make bad ripe Pu-erh very, very clean and translucent. So now there's two types of lower quality ripe Pu-erh. There's the strong, nasty, crazy color that's murky and dusty, and people will say things like, oh, this Pu-erh tea, we need to wash in 2, 3, 4 times before drinking. My observation to that statement is, if so clean, good quality, well stored, why do I need to wash so many times? It is concerned you probably do want to wash ripe Pu-erh once, but pay attention to that wash. Don't use a filter. Is that wash translucent? Is it clean? There should be no murkiness, no cloudiness, and definitely not any kind of strange multicolored oil on top of the surface. Those are undesirable characteristics. So ripe Pu-erh has that strong, musty, crazy kind, and then the kind that's really clean. But you'll notice that really clean ripe Pu-erh can only be steeped 3, 4 times and then drops off. So that's where you can help identify ripe Pu-erh. Now, ripe Pu-erh does have a very unique, strong aroma. And you'll hear things like, oh, that fishiness, that antique taste, that dirt taste is from the wet piling. So I might take a moment to sit back. For ripe Pu-erh, yes, does have a strong taste after wet pile, but that strong profile and taste should not be undesirable. It can be strong, but it should fall in the category of Chinese medicine, ginseng, jujubes. It can be strong, but it should be tolerable. If I smell ripe Pu-erh and strong fish, that is undesirable. Now, maybe it's your first time encountering ripe Pu-erh. Maybe you feel like something has fish-like aroma because it's so new to you. But that fish-like aroma should not be spoiled fish. It should be more like a natural ocean. Now, as you drink more ripe Pu-erh, that natural oceanness will kind of be more like ginseng, Chinese medicine, jujube, but in the beginning, it may be hard to taste. So if you smell ripe Pu-erh and you go, ugh, that's not good. If you smell ripe Pu-erh, oh, strong aroma, but interesting, as long as it's not intensely undesirable, that is a positive note. It takes a little more time to understand ripe, but look for clean ripe. So sorry about the tangent. Hopefully that answers your question.
Those are great. Those are great tips. We do have a question about how to brew, how much to brew. Maybe just a little bit for some people that are not used to brewing to Pu-erh, how much to brew. That was a question from Maddie.
It's so fascinating. These questions are so great. Like I've actually produced whole hour-long videos on how to brew the gram amount. We're not going into that detail. For Pu-erh, I recommend 3 grams for raw. That sounds kind of small. The reason is you want to learn about the natural abundance of tea. Old tea trees have more abundance, so I shouldn't have to be using a lot of tea to get a lot of steepings. I recommend 3 grams for raw. First infusion, boiling. Flash infusion. Then I can smell the leaves again. Then the next infusion, lower that temperature. Raw is green, it's alive, it's delicate, it's fragile. Start with a lower temperature, 190, 195 Fahrenheit. Slowly increase the temperature until you see that tea start to get a little aggressive, a little bitter, then keep that temperature under that point. And these are fast infusions. I'm using a smaller vessel. So 3 grams, flash infusions. Don't worry, I do have a video on how to brew raw Pu-erh on my YouTube channel. It goes over all these components, so you can always reference that. Once you've acquired your taste profile, then you can adjust the grams. Just adjust the grams by 0.5 gram or 1 gram at a time. There is also another component to Pu-erh that's easily forgotten. Pu-erh can be steeped sometimes dozens of times, more than a green tea. So if the tea seems light in the beginning, don't worry. You have 12 or 14 more steepings. Also keep that in mind because it can be hard to drink that much tea. And if we start with 5 or 6 grams, we can easily do sometimes 20-some infusions, and maybe the tea will outsteep us. And if it is a good tea, we want to cherish that tea. We don't want to waste it. So start with a smaller amount. You can learn a lot about the natural abundance. Teas from older tea trees, 0.5 grams in difference from brewing, drastic change. Smaller bushes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 grams, not a drastic difference. All you're really doing is increasing the strength of the flavor. So there's a lot more variable and flexibility in old tea trees. Ripe Pu-erh, you must use more tea. So I use 2 to 3 grams for raw, personally. For ripe, I will use 3 to 5. As the tea ages, you need more tea, just by 0.5 or 1 gram. So ripe, as a rule of thumb, more than raw. Aged tea, a little bit more. And do flash infusions, quick infusions, and you can always reference my 2 videos on how to brew raw and how to brew ripe.
Jeffrey, looking at the time, I know we didn't address all of the questions, but I think we addressed most of the important questions. There's also a lot of comments where people had to leave right away or at 7, and they just really, compliment on how wonderful the session has been. Sure. And I just want to again thank everybody for joining us, and I just see that there are actually people joining us from as far as Australia here. Wow. I'm going to keep all these comments for you, okay? But any other remarks before we leave, Jeffrey?
Yeah. I'll kind of leave a nice little closing note here. Is there is a very beautiful saying from a Vietnamese Buddhist monk who said, and he's a poet, and he said, life is like making tea. You boil your ego, you evaporate all of your worries, you mix in a little sadness, you filter out everything that goes wrong, and you start enjoying happiness. So remember, even with all this kind of technical approach I use for tea, remember we want to drink tea to make us happy, share with our friends, have a harmonious environment. So only go as technical as you like, and remember to sit down, enjoy a cup of tea. And I hope everyone has a really safe and beautiful festival this year, and happy Halloween, because I think this is also Halloween tomorrow. And remember, take a moment from your busy life, enjoy a cup of tea with good friends and family, and cherish that moment. And if you have any further questions about tea or finance, you're always welcome to reach out. You can reach me at macintosht.com. I'm also on social media at Jeffrey H. McIntosh. And I also have a Patreon. So that's patreon.com, Jeffrey McIntosh. If you really want to dive into the technical details of Pu-erh, I'm happy to explore that with all of you together.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. And again, I'm seeing some questions here where we have continued to have sessions like this. Again, check us out, CRPF, which bringing all these Tacoma Moon Festival together is a nonprofit group, and we very much like to support events like this. And we also need members like any other nonprofit group. We're not looking for big sponsor, but we need members to tell us what you want to hear and see. And we would love to have more events like this. And so, stay in touch, join our group. And Ann Larson has putting our Tacoma Moon Festival.org and also Tacoma Chinese Park, or it's a mouthful, I know it's Chinese Reconciliation Project Foundation. Well, thank you again. Good evening, everyone.